Good morning, everyone. Bonjour tout le monde. It's a real pleasure to be here with President Guaidó. First of all, I'd like to thank President Guaidó for his visit to Canada. Thank you, Mr. President, to be with us today, and to commend him for his courage and his commitment to his country and its people in the face of the brutal and illegitimate regime of Nicolas Maduro. It is
a huge honor for Canada to welcome President Guaidó, and it is also excellent news for us because he represents the progress of democracy in Venezuela.
Mr. President. Canada, through its work in the Lima Group and with the international community more broadly, has been a leader in addressing the dire political, economic, environmental, and humanitarian situation in Venezuela. And make no mistake, the situation there has gone from bad to worse as a direct result of the actions of the Maduro regime. Millions have fled the country, and millions more are living in extreme poverty. What's more, as the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, Michelle Bachelet, has pointed out in a detailed report, the people of Venezuela have been subject to grave violations of human rights at the end of the Maduro regime. Something must be done. I hope that today's visit and the visits that President Guaidó has undertaken around the world can serve to reinvigorate efforts to resolve the crisis. Canada's position remains clear. We wish to see a peaceful transition to democracy in Venezuela, led by the people of Venezuela, and including free and fair elections as quickly as possible under international observation. Today, I have had and will have the opportunity to discuss how best we can support you, Mr. President, and his team realizing this goal going forward. Canada will always stand with the people of Venezuela in their desire to restore democracy and human rights to their beloved country. Le Canada, par son travail au sein du groupe de Lima,
Canada, through its work in the Lima Group, and more broadly with the international community, has positioned itself as a leader in the fight against the political, economic, environmental, and humanitarian situation, which is a disaster and is occurring in Venezuela. We must be clear, the situation has gone from bad to worse following the actions of the Maduro regime. Millions of people have fled the country, and millions more are living in extreme poverty. What's more, as highlighted by the United Nations Human Rights Commissioner for Human Rights, Michelle Bachelet, the people of Venezuela have been affected by serious human rights problems caused by Maduro and his acolytes. Urgent action is required. I hope that today's visit and visits that President Guaidó had overseas will give new life to efforts to get out of the crisis. Canada's position remains clear. We want to see a peaceful transition to democracy in Venezuela, led by the people of Venezuela, and including free and fair elections as quickly as possible under international observation. Today, I had and will continue to discuss the best way for us to support the President and his team in attaining these future goals. Canada will always stand by the people of Venezuela in their desire to reestablish democracy and human rights. Thank you.
Mr. President.
Primero, agradecer la hospitalidad.
I would like to start by thanking Canada for its welcome and its determined support for human rights and respect for human dignity, and its strong support for Venezuela and the region. I am here today as part of my international tour to speak on behalf of Venezuelans who do not have a voice. I am speaking on behalf of our indigenous communities that are being displaced because of the illegal extraction of gold in the Amazon region of Venezuela. It is an area of 1,200 square kilometers, and there are 20 indigenous communities that are being displaced, that are being massacred in order to finance terrorist groups in Venezuela, like the ELN. As President Duque said, he's part of the Lima group, and he mentioned that at the anti-terrorism summit in Bogota. And that is why we are here today, because it is a struggle, a constant struggle. We are standing strong. We want to recover democracy in our country through free elections. We want Venezuelans to decide what the future of our country will be. But we are facing these groups in our country, and that's why we are asking for help from countries to help save the Amazon region in Venezuela and to end the violations of human rights in Venezuela. There have been untold numbers of people detained, and they're extrajudiciously in our country by the FAES, which is the Special National Police. And we know that the High Commissioner for Human Rights, Michelle Bachelet, has said in her report that there are human rights violations in Venezuela, and there have been 18,000 extrajudicial murders in our country. That is what the dictatorship of Maduro is doing now. The 121 military personnel have been put in prison. There are murders as well, as you may know, and as is shown in Michelle Bachelet's report. Some were murdered, were beaten to death because some of the protesters were beaten to death because they were demanding freedom. And that is why we are so thankful to have the support of Canada, the countries of the Lima Group, countries of Europe as well, because we want to recover human dignity in our country. We also want to fight climate change. We want to be part of this worldwide struggle to stop CO2 emissions, and we want to ensure that we prevent the devastation, the environmental devastation in the Amazon region of our country as well. So we want to do our part to stop climate change, and we also want to recover human dignity in our country. People are being persecuted, tortured, and our indigenous communities are being massacred. So we need to take action in Venezuela, and we want to say that that Venezuela is not divided, it's not polarized. It truly is a struggle where there is a dictatorship and those of us who want democracy, who want to bring back freedom. And we want to make sure that the people of Venezuela are freed. And that is why we want to make a difference in Venezuela. And of course, we want to help the region as well. There's the peace process in Colombia. We know that we can help. And the crisis in Venezuela is having an impact on Colombia because terrorists, like members of the ELN and the FARC, are finding a safe haven in Venezuela. And that is something that increases the risk of terror in the region and in the world. And we know that with support from the free world, from democracies around the world, we can ensure a transition toward democracy, and we can have truly fair and free presidential elections soon. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. President. You know, if you allow, we'll take a few questions from the Canadian press. In French or in English or in Spanish today, you have a choice.
Thank you, Minister. Michelle Carver with the Globe and Mail. Just first on the coronavirus, can you tell us how many Canadians are quarantined in China over concern of the virus, and if the government will be bringing any help to those Canadians to get out of Wuhan?
Well, obviously, we're following the situation very carefully, as you would expect. Canada has offered its assistance also to the Chinese government under the circumstances. We have about 167 registered Canadians in the region. As you know, Canadians can register And we would encourage Canadians to register in order to get the most updated information. We are in contact with a number of Canadians on the ground, providing consular assistance with respect to their specific needs. We are also liaising with our international partners to look at options to ensure the well-being and safety of all Canadians which would need consular assistance at this moment. Écoutez, nous suivons la situation.
Listen, we're following the situation very closely, obviously. Canada has offered assistance to China, given the circumstances of this virus. We are also very aware that there are 167 Canadians who are currently registered with the Embassy of Canada in China. So 167 Canadians who are in that region. Obviously, we recommend to all Canadians that they register with the Embassy in order that they have access to the most up-to-date information. We will continue to work with our international partners to consider different options in order to ensure the security and safety and health of all Canadians who may need this type of consular assistance in China.
Mr. Guaidó, you left Venezuela amid a travel ban. Are you concerned that you will be arrested when you return to Caracas?
En Venezuela todos están en riesgo.
Well, everything is a risk in Venezuela. Right now, there are over 400 political prisoners, and there are union leaders among those, like Rubén González, parliamentarians who have disappeared, like Gilbert Carros, and there's Juan Guaidó as well, who was kidnapped a year ago. 11 members of my team are in hiding because we are trying to get help for the refugee crisis in the region. There's over 5 million, and it could get as high as 6 million by the end of the year, which is higher even than the migrant flux from Syria. So that's why all of Venezuelans run risks every day in Venezuela. Unfortunately, Caracas is the most violent capital in the world, and we know this. We are there, and we're trying to find help to be able to get through this crisis and to try to fight the criminal conglomerate that is around Nicolas Maduro. We have fought peacefully in a non-violent manner to try to get social and political rights, to be able to express ourselves as well. But you know, it's like a war in Venezuela when you look at the indicators. And we have 5 million migrants, and the GDP in Venezuela has shrunk 6 times. And there's hyperinflation. 83% of homes do not have running water in a continual way, maybe once every 2 weeks. And that is, when you compare those indicators, it's like a country in war. So, of course, there's no freedom of expression, there's militarization of the parliament as well, and of course, I run a risk, of course. But all Venezuelans are at risk, and people on the Latin American continent are at risk as well, because Venezuela is now giving a safe haven to terrorist groups. And there's also a risk to the environment, because they're destroying the Amazon region in Venezuela in order to be able to make money, to be able to keep the regime alive for another day. So yes, there is definitely a risk involved in speaking on behalf of Venezuelans who are standing strong and who are fighting for democracy so that we can recover our fundamental values.
Yes, a follow-up for Minister Champagne on China, and then a question for Interim President Guaidó. Minister Champagne, what considerations have gone into the decision not to act as a government to get Canadians out of Wuhan, and how does that assessment differ from your allies? And from our visitor, are you planning on traveling to the United States anytime soon on this trip? And what will it take to push the ball forward in your country? There hasn't been a lot of progress in the last year.
Mr. President, why don't you go first? I'll leave you, you're our guest, so I'll leave you first and I can answer after.
Sí, gracias, ministro.
Yes, thank you, Minister. The tour has been a very intense one. We started at the Anti-Terrorism Summit with President Duque and Secretary Pompeo, and there were a number of officials there. We had excellent bilateral meetings, and we were talking about help for the refugee crisis in the region. And because we're starting to see social tensions in countries who have welcomed the over 5 million Venezuelan refugees and migrants, and we're preparing to return home. That is one of the main reasons we are pressuring the dictatorship. And we know as well that inside of the country, nurses, students are protesting, and they're pressuring the regime as well because they want to be able to choose their own future. There is a huge social cost right now. There are millions of children whose parents are not in Venezuela. They're in Colombia, they're in Peru, in Ecuador, trying to send something home, $30 a month perhaps, because we know that the minimum wage in Venezuela is $3.50 a month. So we need help quickly. It's urgent because Venezuelans also are trying to protest. We have to make sure that we don't trivialize the evil of the regime. We can't let a dictator destroy the Amazon region in our country. We can act, and we can pressure the dictatorship so that there can be mobilization inside the country, there can be respect for human rights as well, and we want to know and to show that the international community supports us and the opposition, and that it is going to stop the trade of blood gold as well, because that is what is funding the irregular groups in Venezuela. There are armed groups within Venezuela that are attacking parliamentarians. They're attacking citizens in the street who are protesting for their freedom, and that's why we need help from our allies.
To go back to your question on China, I had the opportunity to talk to the Canadian ambassador in Beijing. I can assure you and assure Canadians that all our staff in China is obviously providing all the consular assistance. I mean, you have to take it case by case. There's a number of Canadians, but the number is fairly limited. So that's why you see we are coordinating with international partners and allies to see what are the options on the ground, how can we ensure the health and safety of people. But I can assure you that for every consular cases that has been reported to us, and as you appreciate, it's a very fluid situation. We are providing consular assistance. We are looking at what would need to be done on a case by case. And so far this morning, when I last checked before I came to meet with the president, we had 8 people who had contacted us for on consular matters. We are in touch with them, and I can reassure Canadians the best way obviously would be to Canadians to register first. What we want is to make sure that Canadians could have access to updated information. This is a dynamic situation. By registering, they will have access. And also we have a hotline at the headquarters 24/7 to answer any questions people may have in any emergency consular situation. And I can assure you we will provide all the consular assistance that Canadians may need during the crisis in China.
Steve Wickery, Bloomberg News. For Minister Champagne, can you tell us if there's been any update in Canada's talks with Cuba? Before the election, your predecessor went to Havana to try and enlist Cuba's help in resolving the crisis in Venezuela. Are those talks continuing? And what are the Cubans saying? Y al presidente Guaidó, ¿me puede decir qué piensa usted iniciativa?
President Guaidó, can you tell me what you think of Canada's initiative in Cuba? Could Cuba be part of the solution of the Venezuelan crisis?
Do you want to go first, Mr. President? I can go as you. Oh, that's good. I understand Spanish, so that's okay. I got your question, but I'll focus on my part of the question. Obviously, we will be engaging with Cuba. The President and I have had a discussion about the additional efforts that we are going to be putting together, not only Canada as part of the Lima Group, but also I think as the international community. I'd like to commend the President for his leadership and courage, obviously, asking also Canada to continue its effort to, our objective remain to the restoration of democracy and human rights in Venezuela through, I would say, early elections, which would be free and fair under international observation. We are going to be engaging not only as a Lima Group, but also with others around the world, because I think what the President has told me when we had the meeting, you have to look at the the economic hardship that people are living. You have to look at the environmental disaster that is going on now with the illegal mining of gold. You have to look at the humanitarian crisis that is going on. We think that there will be about 6 million displaced by the end of the year. So everything that we're seeing suggests that we should redouble our efforts. And I want to say thank you to the President for coming to Canada. We have a number of meetings scheduled today, and I think that we will certainly work together. The solution needs to come from the region. We will work with the region, but I think the President would tell you that with Canada's support, we're going to look ahead to provide democracy, restore democracy in Venezuela.
Sí, bueno, no es un secreto que Cuba ha sido parte del
Yes,
soporte.
it's no secret that Cuba has not supported Venezuela ideologically and in terms of intelligence. So we would like them to be part of the solution, and that it be a healthy solution so that Venezuelans themselves can decide the future of Venezuela without any kind of interference from anyone. So we know that we can't do it alone right now because of the crisis and because we have irregular groups. They're being funded in the country. There's a mafia attitude on the state. So the state is not giving protection, it's not providing an economy even. So we think that the talks that Canada has held with other countries, including Cuba, are very positive to find a solution and to move quickly toward a transition in Venezuela. In order to progress. We are thankful for that, and we thank the Lima Group, the International Contact Group as well, and we think that that help will be fundamental. Because this crisis is not just a Venezuelan crisis, because we have the refugee crisis in the region as well. There are millions of Venezuelans. There are people dying as well. There are no vaccines, not just for the coronavirus, but even for malaria, for yellow fever even. So there's a potential crisis there on the border with Brazil and on the border with Colombia. And with regard to Cuba, yes, we would like Cuba to be part of the solution. But right now, what they are doing is they are supporting the Maduro regime somewhat. But with the right support, they could be part of the solution.
Are there any more talks with Cuba planned?
Well, following the discussions we're having today with the President and his team, we are chartered the next step with respect to the Lima Group and the next step that we will be taking to achieve the objective. So I would think that over the course of the next few weeks, we will be engaging with a number of countries, and I would think that Cuba would be one of them.
President Guaidó, what more would you like to see Canada do towards changing the situation on the ground in Venezuela? And Minister, what is Canada prepared to do going forward?
Bien, yo lo comentaba hace unos días en Davos.
I was saying this a few days ago in Davos. And really, for us, for our generation and for our government in Venezuela, really we're not here to point fingers. We are working hard in Venezuela, and I know that Canada and other countries around the world are doing what they can to put the necessary pressure on the regime. Within the country there is mobilization, despite the fact that there are 270 children who have been killed. I'm saying children because they're between the ages of 17 and 25, and they're protesting in the streets. They're children who have lost their sight because they are protesting. Or rather, because they're in their houses, because they're using wood fires to be able to cook in their kitchens. It's crazy. And this has happened. It's happened more than 150 times. And we're going to do what we can. We have made a sacrifice, a huge sacrifice, and we're going to keep doing it. You know, here and in Venezuela, students, nurses, teachers are going to continue to struggle because they are earning $4 a month. You can hardly survive on that. They live in extreme poverty. So we're trying to do what we can. We thank the countries of the Lima Group deeply. We thank Canada deeply as well. And we know that with these productive meetings and with a work program, and with leading the work from Venezuela as well, we can make sure that we can sanction criminals and that there can be progress. We want to sanction corrupt human rights offenders that have left Venezuela, and that's the kind of tool that the free world has to be able to move things forward. For Venezuela, really, it is a humanitarian emergency. There are over 5 million refugees. So we have to see and find what kind of tools we can develop and improve to prevent this kind of solution rather than having to correct it later, which is the situation that we find ourselves in now, not only with Canada, but with all of the regions in the region. And I want to express my deep thanks on behalf of Venezuelans. I am here, and I am very thankful for the welcome that I've been given.
Add to that, no, sorry for that. I would say we're very much aligned. I mean, Canada is one of the toughest sanction regime against more than 113 officials of the Maduro regime. So obviously Canada continues with that, but also with the president, what we've been looking today is what are the next steps. Yesterday I did call the foreign minister of Peru to obviously start thinking about the next step. Clearly today with the president, we are looking at a roadmap as to the other next steps that we need to take in order to restore democracy, human rights. Our commitment is remain, and I would say we're going to be putting additional efforts, trying to engage the international community as well, to push for early, free and fair elections under international observation. We will stand shoulder to shoulder with the people of Venezuela like we've done from day one. We believe that the sanctions are part of the pressure we need to put on the regime, but we're also looking with the president and his team about the additional measures that would need to be taken with the ultimate objective to bring peace and democracy and restore human rights as quickly as possible. You've heard the president talk about the humanitarian crisis. You've heard the president talk about the economic crisis. You've heard the president talking about the environmental crisis. I think that the world is listening, the world is watching, and certainly under the leadership of the president, we will continue to stand shoulder to shoulder to address these issues.
Bonjour, la presse Catherine Lévesque, la presse canadienne.
Good morning, Catherine Lévesque, Presse Canadienne. Good morning, Minister. Similar to what my colleague just said, you said that Canada has already imposed sanctions against Venezuela. You've already denounced the situation for the past year. I was wondering, what are the next steps and what would they look like? What weight does Canada have in this situation to make things change? Well, as you just said, the sanction system is still in place. We have sanctions targeted against 113 individuals who are members of the Maduro regime in Venezuela. We are in talks with President Guaidó and his team. We're talking about the next steps in order to understand how we most quickly can restore democracy and human rights in Venezuela, how we can support the people of Venezuela. We firmly believe that one of the best ways to get to this goal quickly is to have free, fair, and democratic elections in Venezuela under international observation. This is obviously what we've been talking about with the interim president, but also through the Lima Group. And this is why yesterday I was in contact with the foreign minister of Peru, and I mentioned this to the interim president. We've said that we're going to work together, and I said, thanks to the presence of the interim president here, this allows us together to consider the next steps, how we can move towards democracy and the restoration of human rights as quickly as possible in Venezuela.
President Orián Brito from Venezuela. I wanted to ask you, first of all, what do you think will happen? Will there be new sanctions? Will there be more support? You've received a lot of political support from Europe and now from Canada, so that Venezuelans can have a clear idea of what to expect in the coming weeks. So is there a meeting scheduled with President Donald Trump in the next few days? And finally, what is your message to Venezuelans who are in despair and who think that this tour will not really change things? Because there are people who feel that way. What would you tell them? Political support is not just for Juan Guaidó. It is support for the sacrifice that hundreds of millions of Venezuelans are making because they have a right to protest, a right to peaceful protest. And I think that is the support that we are being supported in this attempt to restore democracy and human rights in our country and to put an end to the situation in our country and the pain of absence of their families that are not there, and this humanitarian crisis. You know that there was the Vargas mudslide in Venezuela. It was a horrible disaster, and we thought that we could not overcome. And I'm telling you, the people in Venezuela are hungry, they are living in poverty, and they need hope. There are patients who can't get dialysis. They are dying because they do not have access to medical care. And children don't have water. There's not even emergency medical care that's available for children in Venezuela. Venezuelans know this. And it's, of course, incredibly difficult. There are friends in prison, we have friends who've been killed, and we know this in Venezuela, and that's why we are asking for help. We know that there's no magical solution for a transition, and that it's not a question of saying, well, the Constitution should apply in a place where people are being put in prison or being assassinated so that the regime can stay in power. So international support is for Venezuelans. It is absolutely necessary to be able to contain the irregular groups that are in our country now. So yes, we expect support and action, but we are going to act as well. Everyone will play his or her role. There is a role for Venezuelans in exile as well. And really, Venezuelans are getting their information from Venezuelans outside of the country because there is so much censorship inside of the country, because radio and television inside of Venezuela does not inform Venezuelans. So this is what we've been facing for a year and a half. This is what we're facing with the dictatorship in our country. This is not one man's fight. This is a fight of all Venezuelans, and we are receiving clear support. And the coming meetings with regard to that, we've been revealing every meeting as it comes because we are dealing with a dictatorship, and so we don't really want to be very clear about what's coming. But what I can tell Venezuelans is that we're going to be home soon, we're going to mobilize, we're going to demand the support that we need, and we are going to go toward a transition. And when that happens will depend on how focused the pressure is for an election. And that's what happened when we pushed our way into the National Assembly. We were pushing in that direction. We are going to be revealing the meetings as they come up in the coming days.
There are no barriers that the president cannot climb. So I would say that we are fully supportive. We trust on him. We've seen him in action.
Bonjour, Micheline Laflamme, Radio-Canada.
Good morning, Micheline Laflamme, Radio-Canada. Monsieur Champagne, I'd like to know why Canada doesn't feel it important right now to evacuate Canadians from Wuhan in China, and what will it take for us to do this? Thank you. What I can say is for the moment, we have 8 consular cases that were brought to us this morning. As you know, the situation is very fluid. It's changing hour to hour. I've talked with the ambassador of Canada in China. We've talked with the teams in Beijing. Everyone is ready to support us, and I would say it's really a case-by-case situation. We are present. We are there to offer all the consular assistance assistance necessary. Obviously, I can't go into the details of every request that's been put to us, but please believe that each of the requests is being dealt with by our consular representatives in China. We are working with our allies to consider all the options available to us to ensure the health and safety of Canadians who are in China. But I believe that before drawing conclusions, I can assure you that the people who we are currently in contact with are getting all the consular assistance that they need and that they have asked for from the Canadian government. So we're going to continue to remain in contact with them and provide them with the assistance they need so they can leave on partner airlines. Anything's possible. I mean, it's all about the best way to serve Canadians overseas, and the best way to do that is to work with our allies. The situation is fluid, it's dynamic, and I'd like to reassure all Canadians that all those who have contacted the Embassy of Canada or the Government of Canada are getting consular assistance, the assistance they need and are asking for, because obviously every case is a bit different. Every case is asking for different support, and based on the last information I got, there are 8 people who contacted the consular services, and we're working with these 8 people to figure out what their exact needs are and provide all the consular assistance that Canada does offer to Canadians overseas. Thank you.
I missed that one. Sure you didn't get one? I got it going way back. Yeah, but maybe you got a silhouette or something.